Hello everyone. Okay, I hope we're all well and happy and we're all having a wonderful day. Okay, in this lesson at the moment, we're going to have a look at the Liberal Democrats. Okay, so the next couple of lessons we'll do the Liberal Democrats before we move on to the other small parties. And just like what we did with Labour and the Conservatives, we need to know a little bit about the history of this party. We need to know some of the philosophical underpinnings of this party. We need to know what factions there are within this party and what their key ideas on policies are. So, first of all, then we'll look at the history of the Liberal Democrats. This is the essence of this particular PowerPoint slide. So, the modern Liberal Democrats were formed in 1988. So, in that respect, they're not the very old party in terms of their current kind of guise, so to speak. And it was the joining together of two political parties which merged to form the Liberal Democrats. One was the old Liberal Party, which in Victorian times was the Whig Party. And the second party was one called the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. And the first leader of the Liberal Democrats, and he led it for, must be about 12 years or so, was someone called Paddy Ashdown. He died actually a couple of Christmases ago. He died quite recently. And he was the first real leader of the Liberal Democrats. So, the first party, which was one of the two that created the Liberal Democrats, I suppose, was the old Liberal Party. They used to dominate British politics. It was used to be them and the Conservatives. They were the two main parties. Following 1918 and the rise of the Labour Party, the Liberal Party kind of diminished. I think that's probably the best term to describe it. 1922 was the last time they saw power with David Lloyd George as the Prime Minister. And since then, they've kind of declined and declined. One or two of them were in the coalition. There's a picture of David Lloyd George. One or two of them were in the coalition government during the Second World War, but that was more for show than anything else, I think. And Labour overtook them as the main party of opposition to the Conservatives from 1922 onwards. Since that date, they always maintained a small number of MPs, often around about 10. Sometimes it was a bit less than that, sometimes it was a couple more than that, but usually it was around 10 MPs which they had in Parliament. There has been quite colourful party leaders. Perhaps Jeremy Thorpe was the most colourful one in the 1970s. There were some scandals around him. The BBC did a series about it. He was involved in the disappearance of someone, shall we say. But that was the Liberal Party. So about 1988-ish, this party had, I don't know how many MPs exactly had in the 1980s. It was, 5 or 6 MPs, something like that. Now, the second party which formed the Liberal Democrats was the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. This was a brand new party and it was formed in 1981, mainly by Labour politicians or former Labour politicians, but there were one or two kind of One Nation Conservatives as well who joined this party. The original group who formed the party were known as the Gang of Four. And here's a picture of them here. So you see in the far left here, this is Roy Jenkins. Roy Jenkins was Labour Home Secretary in the 1960s. He was responsible for ending the death penalty in Britain and things of that nature. Who else we got here? We've got Bill Rogers, we've got David Owen, and we've got Shirley Williams. Shirley Williams, again, she was seen as being a bit of a bright light in Labour Party in the 1970s, and they'd all shared various key jobs in the Labour government of the 1970s. However, when Labour lost power in 79 and then Labour moved to the political left under Michael Foot, this group could no longer stomach being part of the Labour Party, and so they decided to form their own Labour. Well, they're not the SDP. The main policies of this party was they were passionately pro-European. They accepted much of Mrs. Thatcher's economic reforms, but they still wanted that kind of fairly generous welfare state. And I put here rather cheekily, they were kind of New Labour before New Labour, if you like. I'm not quite sure Shirley Williams and co would kind of describe themselves as New Labour, but that is one way to think about what this group were like. Very pro-Europe, accepted much as Mrs Thatcher's reforms, wanted this welfare state and a good and well-funded National Health Service. There were high expectations for this party to do well. There's all this stuff about how they were going to nearly win the election in 1983. They only got a handful of seats in 1983. And in 1987 as well, they also did really badly as well. So the SDP kind of had this great hope of doing really, really well. In the end, they did really badly in the elections of 83 and 87. So you've got here this Liberal Party with 5 or 6 seats. You've got this SDP party, again, not a huge number of seats. I can't remember exactly how many it had, but it's probably, 6 or 7, something like that. Feel free to find out how many they had after 1987. And so they decided to merge and to create a new party, the Liberal Democrat Party. Okay, and as I said to begin with, Paddy Ashdown was the first leader of this new Liberal Democrat Party. He was a former Marine, very good campaigner. He had very clear policies, he was quite charismatic in many ways. And he managed in 1997 to win 46 seats in that election. Many of them were off Conservatives. And in fact, before the 1997, during that John Major government, which began to disintegrate, the Liberal Democrats had some real quite stunning electoral victories in by-elections. That's by-elections in a seat where an MP dies and they have to have an election between general elections for his or her replacement. The Liberal Democrats did really well in those by-elections, and in 1997, in the general election, they actually gained 46 seats. He had some quite distinctive policies, Paddy Ashdown. One of them was to increase income tax by 1 penny, 1%, and he said that would be ring-fenced and it would go towards building better schools and better hospitals. He supported Labour's plans for a Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly. He, very passionate, believed that we should change the voting system at Westminster to a proportional system. Very strong supporter of the European Union. Believed that Britain should join the Euro in the 1990s. Okay, and as I said there, Paddy Ashdown stays around until about 1999. Then he, I suppose he retires, I suppose, would be the thing. His immediate successor is this person here, Charles Kennedy. He kept most of Ashdown's policies. He was seen as being a bit more left-wing than Paddy Ashdown. And obviously it's quite difficult to challenge Labour under Tony Blair because obviously Blair was quite strong in his first government. However, the Iraq War became a real place where the Liberal Democrats opposed the Labour government. And in many ways, because the Conservatives also supported the Iraq War as well, they really kind of differentiated themselves from Labour and the Liberal and the Conservatives by being really strong opponents of the war in Iraq. In the 2005 general election, he won 62 seats, which I think must be the greatest number of seats the Liberal Democrats have ever had. A lot of these were actually former Labour seats, so they'd already won quite a few Conservative seats from the John Major period, which they kept. They kind of had those disillusioned Conservatives. Well, in 2005, they picked up a number of former Labour seats, places like Rochdale, for example, in Greater Manchester. So again, they were picking up disillusioned Labour voters as well. And in some ways, the Liberal Democrats, you could argue, often do pick up disillusioned people from other parties, because many people think, well, they're not going to form a government. They're quite an attractive protest vote, I suppose. In 2006, Kennedy stands down due to ill health. He's briefly replaced by former Olympian Ming Campbell. He's, though, very quickly seen as being too old. And in 2007, they have another election, and this time they elect Nick Clegg as the leader of the Liberal Democrats. And there he is. Okay, in the 2010 general election, the Liberal Democrats actually lose a couple of seats. I think they have about 57 seats. However, the Conservatives emerge as the largest party, but they do not have a majority in Parliament. You need a majority of seats in Parliament in order to form governments. The Labour Party under Gordon Brown got fewer seats than the Conservatives, and so the Conservatives began to look round for, which other party can we perhaps make some kind of deal with, and the Liberal Democrats became the choice. It's quite interesting because the last time they had a Liberal Prime Minister, it was in coalition with the Conservatives in 1922 with David Lloyd George. And apparently the head of the Conservative team who were kind of doing the negotiating with the Liberal Democrats, a man called William Hague, who has a keen interest in history, apparently said to his wife after he did the deal with the Liberal Democrats, saying, I think I've just killed the Liberal. He always calls them the Liberals. I think I've just killed the Liberal Party. Because the last time the Liberal Democrats had a coalition with the Conservatives, it kind of destroyed them for, 100 years. Okay, the Liberal Democrats, we said, they won 57 seats. And in this period, the coalition proved quite difficult for the Liberal Democrats. They had to break one of their key promises around the tuition fee issue. Which did prove to be quite catastrophic for them. Some Liberal Democrats were quite unhappy about being in a coalition with the Conservatives. Some Liberal Democrats like Nick Clegg seemed more than comfortable being in a coalition with the Conservatives, and I'll explain why that might be the case later on. Following the coalition in 2015, William Hague's views were founded on fact, really, because the Lib Dems had a catastrophic defeat in the election of 2015. So that old thing about I may have killed the Liberal Party in 2010 proved to be correct. They went from 57 seats down to 8. Some of their key people lost seats. So Charles Kennedy, who we mentioned before, he'd been an MP since he was like 23 years old, former leader of the Liberal Democrats, lost. Vince Cable, again, he was a leading figure amongst the Liberal Democrats, lost. Simon Hughes on the left there, again, he was seen as a key figure amongst the Liberal Democrats, also lost. Tim Farron briefly took over from Nick Clegg as the leader. He was seen as being much more on the left of the Liberal Democrats. Following the 2017 general election, where the Liberal Democrats did not perform very well, I want to say they got up to 11 seats, but I may well be wrong on that. He stood down in favour of Vince Cable, who had regained his seat in the 2017 election. But as we know, in 2018, Jo Swinson becomes the leader of the Liberal Democrats. In the 2019, and she takes a very radical stand against Brexit, very anti-Brexit. The Liberal Democrats are a very pro-European party. She said that she wanted to just ignore the referendum and revoke it. Many criticised this for saying, well, isn't that undemocratic? And in the election of 2019, the Liberal Democrats don't do very well. And in fact, Jo Swinson actually lost her seat in that election to the Scottish National Party. And a little task for you before I do the second video is, who is the new leader of the Liberal Democrats? So there's a little task for you whilst the second video is constructed for you.